Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. We're diving into a topic today that's something that everyone deals with, but no one really wants to talk about. It's money and relationships.
Yeah, and honestly, that's probably part of the problem right there.
Right.
Avoiding talking about money is kind of like, when you've got that leaky faucet and you just kind of hope that if you ignore it long enough, it'll just magically fix itself.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, it usually doesn't.
No, it really doesn't. And speaking of things that don't magically fix themselves, you sent in a really interesting collection of articles about this very topic. And one of the things that jumped out at me right away was this fidelity study that found that 1 in 5 couples actually say that finances are the biggest challenge in the relationships. Bigger even than infidelity, bigger even than family drama.
Yeah, it's a big. And you know what? It's not even always about who has more or less money.
Okay.
It's about all of the emotions and all of the meaning that we attach to it, and all of that, it comes out sideways in our relationships. And, those meanings impact everything.
Right.
I mean, from how often can we go out on a date night to what are our long-term goals, which is huge when you're trying to build a life with somebody.
It really is. And one article called this financial intimacy, which I thought was really interesting.
I love that.
Because it's not just about splitting the rent check every month.
Yeah.
It's about being open and honest about the good, the bad, and the how do we deal with this together kind of thing. So having these conversations early on is super crucial.
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
It's just I always think about it okay, if you're avoiding these money talks in the very beginning, it's kind of like ignoring this tiny little crack in the foundation of your relationship.
Right.
It might seem like a small thing now, but later on, I mean, you've seen it. I've seen it. It can become this major fault line.
Oh, yeah.
And those are hard to come back from.
So it's not just couples therapy we need. It's financial couples therapy, right from the get-go.
Yeah, like a premarital financial counseling. I love it.
Yeah.
Because we all come into relationships with these invisible, money scripts that we don't even realize. That's what this psychologist James Langevere calls them.
Okay.
And they're basically these deeply ingrained beliefs and habits around money.
Right.
And they're mostly formed, get this, during our childhood. So think about it.
Why?
Our upbringing.
Yeah.
It really shapes our views about money more than we realize.
Okay, so tell me more about these money scripts, because I think this is fascinating. So what do those look like in action? And how can those really impact our relationships?
So imagine this. You've got one partner, and they grew up believing that, debt is the absolute worst thing in the world, right? And then their partner, totally comfortable whipping out the credit card for, everything, uses it strategically.
Okay.
But those two mindsets, they can clash big time, especially if they're not discussed, out in the open.
Right. Yeah. It's speaking completely different languages, but with your money.
100%.
And it's not even always the big stuff, either going into debt or anything like that. Even just daily spending habits. I feel that can cause so much tension in a relationship too.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You have one person, they're meticulously tracking every single penny on 5 different budgeting apps. And then your partner's over here just throwing caution to the wind.
Totally. Whatever. It's fine.
Let's do it. But without understanding each other and without compromise, those differences can turn into some knockdown, drag-out fights.
For sure. Okay, so it seems like communication is key here. But how do we actually have these conversations in a way that's healthy and productive and doesn't just devolve into a screaming match?
Yeah.
Especially because I feel a lot of us, we grew up and money was just this taboo subject that you did not talk about.
Yeah, I know. It's so true. But that's where I think those money dates can be really helpful. And a lot of articles brought this up.
Okay.
The key is choosing a time to have these conversations when you're both relaxed.
Okay.
And you can actually focus on each other.
So not when the bills are due and you're both stressed out.
Exactly. Exactly. But,
yeah.
Maybe this looks like, I don't know, dinner, candles, mood lighting.
I mean, I'm here for it.
Right. Just saying, if that's what you're into. But seriously, it's about creating this safe space, this judgment-free zone.
Right.
To really sit down and talk about your finances.
So it's like a relationship checkup, but for your bank accounts.
Exactly.
I love that.
There you go. And actually, I saw some articles even suggested either using a shared budgeting app together so you can both kind of see what's going on, or even reading a personal finance book together, something to get the conversation going,
Yeah.
Find what works for you.
That's great advice. What about, like, those arguments that we have in our relationship that on the surface have nothing to do with money, but somehow money always seems to?
Oh, the dishes.
It always comes back, right? Like the
Hmm.
Forbes advisor study that we have mentions this, how even fights about chores or career choices can sometimes stem from like these unspoken money tensions that are
Exactly.
just bubbling under the
I
surface.
love that you said that because it's like, is it really about the dishes?
Or is it about something else?
Right. So maybe one partner is feeling very much stuck in a dead-end job, but they feel like they can't quit because of the financial pressures.
Right.
Or maybe someone feels like they're always the one who's carrying more of the financial burden.
Yeah. And if you're not talking about it, that can build up
Oh,
to...
resentment with a capital R.
Exactly. Speaking of resentment, I have to ask you about this because one of the articles asked this very provocative question, and it was, is dishonesty about money a form of infidelity?
Oh, that's a juicy one. It
Right.
really makes you think, right, about the role of trust and transparency when we're talking about relationships, romantic relationships specifically.
Totally.
Yeah.
Because it's like if you can't be honest and open about your finances, what else are you not being upfront about? Okay, this is a lot to unpack here. Can we lighten the mood a little bit? I saw this meme the other day and it was all about...
Hmm. Let me guess. Looking for a man in finance.
Yes, that one. But all jokes aside, though,
Yeah.
it speaks to this very real desire that a lot of people have for wanting a partner who's financially compatible.
Right.
And that goes so far beyond just like looking at their income level.
It's so much bigger than that
Right.
because you can
It
have
really is.
shared values, shared priorities,
Yeah.
and you're on the same page about your financial future because, like I said, you can both be, absolutely rolling in dough.
Totally.
But if your spending habits are completely different and you're not on the same page with your long-term goals, that is not going to work.
No.
That is a recipe for disaster.
It's like that old saying, opposites attract, and then they attack each other over the credit card bill.
That's right. But it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Open communication,
Yeah.
setting those clear expectations,
Yes.
and a little bit of financial empathy goes a long way.
Okay, so we've talked about how important it is to talk about money, but we've also kind of said that it's not always easy to actually do that,
Yeah.
especially when we bring those like ingrained money scripts that we talked about into the equation. Like what happens when you grew up, you never talked about money. It was like taboo, very hush hush.
Right.
But then you're with someone who's like an open book.
Here's my credit score. How about yours? Those are fun conversations.
No, but it's true. It's a classic example of how like those unspoken expectations or like those unspoken scripts can really clash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's like one person's coming in, wanting to waltz, and the other one's doing the tango.
Right.
And you're stepping all over each other's toes.
Mhm.
So how do we even start having these conversations in a way that doesn't feel like, all right, sit down, we need to talk, this is an intervention, this
Right.
is serious.
Right, like an interrogation.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I saw a couple times in the articles was framing it around shared goals.
Oh.
So instead of like, all right, we're sitting down, let's talk about maybe it's like, hey, wouldn't it be amazing if in 2 years we could finally take that trip we've been talking about?
Mm.
Okay, well, how do we make that happen?
Yeah. Focus on the positive. Find that common ground. I love that.
Exactly.
But what about like the day-to-day money clashes that come up?
Right.
Like, I don't know, what if one person really loves to go out to fancy dinners, but the other person is like a home-cooked meal kind of person? How do you navigate that?
I mean, that's where those money dates can come in really handy because it's not like you do it one time.
Right.
It's a regular thing. So you're checking in, you're talking about the budget, you're talking about like, oh, this unexpected expense came up, or
Mhm.
how do we want to approach birthday gifts for all of our friends or vacations or, whatever it is.
It's like your financial powwow, just to check in.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay. So we've talked about couples, we've talked about romantic relationships, but I think it would be remiss if we didn't touch a little bit on mixed income friendships.
Yes.
Especially, I'm thinking of this more from the perspective of the friend who has a little bit more financial flexibility.
How do you navigate those waters without making the other person feel uncomfortable?
Such a good point. And the NerdWallet article had some really good tips for this. And it really just comes down to being really mindful and really empathetic.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're the one suggesting the restaurant, maybe offer a few different options.
Okay.
Like, hey, do you want to, grab tacos? Or are we feeling like a 5-star Michelin experience?
Right.
Just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Give people options.
Yes.
So they don't feel pressured to, overspend or do something that they're not comfortable with.
Yeah. And on the flip side, too, if you're the one who is trying to stick to a budget, don't be afraid to speak up.
Absolutely.
Like, suggest alternatives, get creative with your dates, host something at your place. There are definitely ways to do it.
Absolutely. It's really about, I think, finding that balance between, like, respecting your own boundaries,
Right.
but also, like, nurturing that friendship, too.
Yeah.
And this whole dynamic that we're talking about, I think it's even more amplified when you're talking about dating.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Yeah, especially when you're first getting to know someone.
It's like, how soon is too soon to bring up your credit score?
Yeah.
Asking for a friend.
So what do you, like, are you an 800? Because, no, it's a tough one. Because you don't want to be, like, pulling out, asking them about their, like, Roth IRA on the first date.
Right. Show me your investment portfolio.
Exactly. But at the same time, like, you also probably don't want to waste your time with someone if you find out 3 months down the line that their values are just so different from yours.
Totally.
When it comes to money.
Yeah, so it's like this delicate dance you're doing in the beginning of like trying to be open and honest about money, but also not making it like the main course.
Yeah.
Until maybe like date 3.
Maybe date 3. But in all seriousness, though, I do think those early conversations that you have when you are getting to know someone are a great time to kind of pay attention and see.
Yeah.
What clues can I pick up on in terms of, like, their habits, their attitudes around money?
Okay, so like look for those red flags. If they're bragging about their stock options on a first date or complaining about how much their rent is, maybe that's a sign.
Yeah. Like, proceed with caution.
Right.
It's about gathering information, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's like, are we financially compatible? And again, compatibility doesn't mean we make the exact same amount of money. But do our values align? Do our goals align?
Right, because you could be earning, both be earning 6 figures, but if one of you is a huge saver and the other is a spender,
oh, yeah,
that's going to be a problem.
it's going to come out eventually. And you know what? It might not be apparent right away.
Right.
Which is why having those conversations, being open, honest from the beginning is so crucial. The more you talk, the better you're going to understand each other's.
Right.
Like, what's your style with money?
Yeah.
And can we agree on the big stuff?
That makes total sense. It's like learning each other's love language, but for money.
I love that, yes.
And speaking of money love languages, I kind of want to circle back to that really juicy question that we got in one of the articles about, like, is dishonesty about finances a form of infidelity?
Yeah, that one sparks some.
Yeah, a lot of debate.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Because it's like, on the one hand,
it's your money, right?
It's your money.
You shouldn't have to.
I don't need to tell you about every latte I'm buying.
Exactly.
But at the same time, if you're hiding, like, significant financial information or making big decisions.
Yeah, without your partner.
Without talking to them.
Yeah.
That can feel
absolutely
like a betrayal, 100%. And I think that's where, again, our money scripts come in.
Yeah.
Because if someone grew up in a house where, again, you just didn't talk about money, it was very hush-hush, they might not even realize that their behavior is hurtful or disrespectful.
Right, because they're just used to it. And it comes back to that idea of, like, communication is key, empathy is key.
100%.
We've talked a lot about couples and, like, navigating those money conversations in our romantic relationships and even with close friends. But it's like, what about when we're talking about money in those bigger social circles? Like, I don't know, say you get invited to a destination wedding or, like, a really fancy group trip.
Right.
It can be really tricky, to try to balance your own personal budget and, like, your financial goals with those social expectations.
Yeah, and I think especially now, like, post-pandemic, there's this added pressure, it seems, to be back out there and to be doing all the things and saying yes to everything.
Totally.
But like we've been talking about, everyone's in a different place financially, and all of that, it can make things a little awkward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, how do you navigate that? Say there's this event and, deep down you're like, I can't really afford this, but you also don't want to.
Right.
Not go, like, do you speak up? Or do you just, like, suffer in silence and then secretly resent everyone who's there?
Right. And even from, like, the flip side, right?
Yeah.
If you're the one who's planning, like, how do you make sure that everyone feels included?
Yeah.
Regardless of their budget.
Right. It's definitely a two-way street. So let's kind of break that down because I think that's important. So let's say you're the one who's planning, like, you're the one who's maybe putting together, you know, the bachelorette party.
Yeah.
Or you're the one planning this trip.
Yeah.
What are some ways to, like, be sensitive to the fact that not everyone
Yes.
is working with the same budget?
Well, first of all, I think transparency is a really great place to start.
Okay.
So instead of it just being this like vague idea of, oh, we're going to go on a trip,
Right.
be upfront like, okay, generally speaking, we're thinking it's going to cost about this much.
Right.
Or maybe even offering a couple of different options, like, do we want to do a potluck? Or are we feeling like a fancy restaurant? Do we want to do a staycation? Or are we thinking international?
I love that because it gives people the information they need to actually make an informed decision instead of feeling like,
right,
well, I guess I'm just going to say yes to this and figure it out later.
I'm going into debt, but...
Exactly. And then on the flip side, too, if you're the one who's on the receiving end of this invitation and, you're looking at and you're like, oh,
right,
like, this is really pushing it for me. Don't be afraid to, like, politely decline.
Totally. Or... and I love that you said this.
Yeah.
Offer an alternative.
Yes.
Because a true friend will totally understand.
And I think that just goes back to that intentional spending that we were talking about earlier, right? Like,
yep.
It's okay to say no to something, even if it sounds really fun, if it doesn't line up with,
right,
your values or, like, your goals.
100%. Or even suggesting, like, hey, instead of doing that, like, why don't we get together and do, like, a potluck dinner at my place, or, let's go to the park.
Yeah.
I feel like some of the best memories are made.
Oh, absolutely.
When it's not about, like, this lavish, expensive thing.
It really isn't about the price tag at the end of the day. It's about the connection and the shared experience.
Exactly. And I think that that's such a good takeaway from everything that we talked about today. Because, yes, money is important. And yes, it affects our relationships, and it affects our social lives, and it affects our well-being overall.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to rule our lives.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to dictate our happiness.
I love that. It's so true. And I think, like, even if you just take one thing away from this conversation today, let it be that. Money matters. It's important to talk about, but it doesn't have to be this, like, scary thing.
Absolutely.
Like, you can have these conversations, and by embracing open communication and practicing empathy and just, like, being really honest with yourself and with your partner,
yes,
you can build these really healthy relationships and fulfilling relationships with yourself and with the people that you love.
I love that. So well said.
Well, thank you so much for all of your insights today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Of course. And to you, dear listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, money talks, but it doesn't have to steal the show. Until next time.